All right, I think we're good. Hey everyone. With me today I have a writer, no, the writer and creator of audio award-winning audio drama podcast, Once Upon a Wasteland. Brad Williams. How you doing? Based on Fallout, the Fallout series, correct?
That is correct. It's mostly based on Fallout 76, which is the latest Fallout game, but there are some tie-ins to previous games too. It's a pretty big universe to draw from.
Yeah, no, definitely. I know. I know I've seen like clips of the first Fallout, the second Fallout, but I know my first like introduction to it was Fallout 3, I believe, when it first became like more 3D and first person shooter. And it's funny, I never actually beat it myself. I watched a friend beat it, like the whole thing. So I feel like this is the same way where it's like, okay, I can't really live it, but the drama itself, listening to it's very uh like you get sucked into that universe. You know what I mean? And what like you're saying if it's based basically on the Fallout 76 universe, what inspired you to like go that route from you know I assume you just play the game.
Yeah, it's kind of a winding road that got me there. So a long time ago, about 20 well, up until about 25 years ago, I was a writer. I did some TV work, that kind of thing. And I also I was an actor. I think I did my last real stage show in the year 2000. So I had
Mhm.
a background as an actor. I also did a fair amount of voice work, narration, and those sorts of things. A little bit of announcing here and there. Excuse me. So basically stopped doing that. But then I saw on Reddit somebody who had an existing Fallout audio drama said, "Hey, I'm looking for voice actors. So if you want to audition, why don't you send in a an audition tape, and we'll see. We'll cast people and go from there." So I thought, what the heck? It's a low leverage kind of thing. I still had some equipment, so I sent in my audition, and I did get cast. And that podcast is the Modus Files, which has been around for about a year longer than our show. So I got the role of Modus, which in Fallout is an artificial intelligence who works for the Enclave, which is sort of a splinter military organization that's built from the remains of the former U.S. government. So I got that role, and over the course of that show, I've done, I think, a total of 6 characters in that show so far. Modus is the
Mhm.
biggest one. There's a couple of other ones that had fairly prominent roles, so I had to stretch my legs a little bit as an actor so that people didn't necessarily peep that it was me doing it every time. But it's one of those things that I was able to do. So as a part of that, Lawrence, who's the guy that is behind Modus Files, he and I had talked about storytelling and all that kind of thing. And I mentioned that I had previously been a writer, and he said, "Hey, listen, why don't you flesh out the backstory of your main character in 76? Just write a little blurb about the character." So I did that. And he said, "Oh, hey, that's pretty good. Why don't you write some little scenes with that character?" So I did that. And he said, you should consider making your own audio drama podcast. And it was a daunting idea, but one of the great things about Lawrence is, in addition to being very helpful, he also has a great way of framing the way that these kinds of things work, so that it's not the old saying is, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? It's that kind of a thing where if you look at it as, you look at, say, Chad, or you look at Modus Files, and you're like, oh my goodness, I could never do that because it's such a massive thing. Where do you even start? Well, somebody like Lawrence is the perfect person to give you that information, to tell you where to start and how to start and where the resources are and who you can tap if you have questions and all those kinds of things.
Mhm.
So in October of 2021, after about, I'd say, about 3 or 4 months of prep, of some writing, I outlined the course of the season. I wrote a couple of episodes, started to reach out to people for casting. I did an open casting call, but I really didn't get a lot of response. And I found out later, one of the people who's in my cast now said, people, and this made perfect sense when she told me this, people are often reluctant to audition for new projects because so many projects on sites like Casting Call Club nothing ever comes from them. So people
Yeah.
don't want to take that time, because auditioning, it takes time, it takes effort, and people don't want to go through that if it's just going to fall apart. So I totally, now that I have that perspective, I understand what happened. But I got extremely lucky, and again, this is all down to Lawrence being able to get in contact with some folks that I was able to cast as the two leads, and then the cast sort of fleshed out from there. So we did a prologue, which is actually Lawrence and I, just a two-hander, as a prologue to set up the story, and then in early November we released the first episode.
No, that yeah, I've been listening to some of it, and it reminds me. I'm not that old per se, but it reminds me of like the old what is it, Lone Ranger, like radio kind of dramas like Batman.
Mhm.
And I remember hearing them as a kid, like maybe reruns somewhere, my grandfather or something. So it's interesting to like tell a story like that where it's not even that you're limited to the means of technology that we have. It's you chose to go the audio narrative route. And then it intrigues me also as well because podcasts nowadays are just people talking, interviews kind of like this, you know what I mean? And to go the route of like an audio drama is, I don't know, it's, I feel like quite a feat, considering every content is everywhere, you know what I mean, as far as YouTube and all that, and then scripted as well, where reality is what everyone tends to get more bang for their buck for. But I guess I guess it's cheaper and all that. But
Mhm.
as far as like, I know you're just wrapped up like the second season.
Mhm.
Did you have it idea to go that long? Did you have it, because I know you just said you outlined it for so long. Did you plan to go for that long, or?
Well, the it ends up being one of those things where I was going to make a decision about how long I would go. Well, I would make a decision about whether I would continue when I hit the end of the season. So all that I really outlined, that I formally outlined, was what was going to happen in that first season. And then if I decided to continue, I just go through that process again. I do have an extremely high level idea of where I want the story between the two central characters to go over the course of a 3-season arc. But I'm careful to construct everything for each season so that the finale of each season can serve as either a season finale or a series finale. So I don't leave anybody hanging. And I also make sure, I try to make sure, that it's a satisfying conclusion if that does end up being it. And it's I'm doing the same thing this year that I did last year. Last year the season ended in May, I think. I was in Austria when the season finale of season 1 dropped.
Mhm.
And I said I wasn't going to make a decision on whether or not to have a season 2 until maybe late June, early July. So I did that, and I'm basically following the same path this time, where I'll just step away from it for a little while, recharge, decompress a little bit, and at some point in that general time frame, in that probably July, Augustish time frame, I'll sit down. I'll say, okay, do I want to go back and do this? It's I did a live stream yesterday where I talked about this a little bit. This is difficult. It's hard to do.
Yeah, I can't imagine,
It's
especially at the production you all are, or you're doing it. I don't know if you have a team or it's just you yourself,
Well, yeah.
but
So,
mhm,
in terms of, so I do all the writing, and I do all of the editing, sound design, that kind of thing.
yeah,
But beyond that part of it, it's also very emotionally draining to go through this process, because obviously you have to worry about making sure that you're putting a good product out there. So there's that part of it. But there's also, you're sort of putting yourself out there, and then the response to that is in a way a response to you. So it really kind of puts you through the emotional ringer when you go about it that way. I do. But in terms of actual production, it's not I don't want to say it's a one-man show, because it's really not. Obviously, I have a full cast that does all the voice work, and I said, because my background was mostly as an actor, that I didn't want to be in the show. I'm in it a couple times here and there, but I made a conscious effort to not cast myself. And I know a lot of
mhm,
people cast themselves in their productions, and that's cool. But it wasn't something that I that I wanted to do. I do have a co-producer who Vitriol, who plays Odessa in the show. She has grown into an extremely important part of this whole thing. She does a lot in terms of marketing. She gives me a lot of help in terms of reviewing scripts. She does sensitivity reads for me sometimes. I'll bounce ideas off her and say, hey, what do you think about this? She's a very important person to me. So having her sort of by my side and having my back through this whole process is that's helped a lot. Like I don't think that I would have done a second season if it wasn't for her, because I
Mhm.
just knowing that she's there, having somebody that you care about and that cares about you, that you're able to share this sort of thing with, that goes a long way in helping with that emotional toll that I mentioned.
No, and yeah, I know I've, had a story. I mean, I would like to say I'm a more of a writer myself too, but to go to the links you're going to as far as, like, actually producing and all that, it looks like a lot. I know when I'll just edit something, real quick, it's like, man, and you're there, putting in sound effects, putting in the dialogue, the music.
Mhm.
It's just a full fledged, like, a old school radio drama. Uh, you know, uh, I don't know what else to call it, but yeah, no, it's very well produced, and I was wondering, yeah, how much of a team you did have, and it was all mostly you. Do you like having that, like, I'll say, creative control over it? Do you wish you couldn't, like, outsource it? you know?
Yeah, if in a perfect world, I would have a writer's room, where I could show run, but farm out some of the writing to other talented writers, just to take some of that burden off. And that's also the environment that I come from, that I'm used to, where it's more than one person doing that writing. So you really have that interplay, and you can bounce stuff off each other, and you can review it. And in a 10 episode season, like look at Doctor Who, the showrunner can say, all right, I'm going to write these 4 episodes, you're going to write these two, you're going to write these two, and then the showrunner will, they have final say on everything, and they'll probably edit the scripts and those kinds of things. And I would absolutely love to be able to get out of the editing game. That's something I have no experience with. Well, I should say I had no experience going in with doing that. I had never in my life opened up a DAW to do any kind of editing. So
Mhm,
one thing that I think has helped is I do think I have a pretty good ear, and with dialogue, that's and especially a show that's as talky as mine, that's really important to be able to get that right, to make it sound like it's two people talking, because all the recording that we do is async. So you have Letitia, who's over in the UK, recording her lines. You have Vitriol in Pittsburgh. You have Lucy recording hers in around Washington D.C., and all doing them at a completely different times. So being able to stitch that together in a way that sounds like people talking, it's a huge credit to them. The fact that they can record like that and make it sound like they're talking to somebody, or talking with somebody, not even just talking to somebody. So huge credit to them to make my life easier, so I don't really have to worry about that part. And then for me, when I edit it, I just have to worry about, number one, matching up the sound, making sure the EQ is the same. I do a little bit of a pan, so it sounds like they're coming from, slightly from one side or the other. And probably the most important part is getting the rhythm, that conversational rhythm of how people talk.
mhm.
And different people talk differently. Like, they have different rhythms to their speech. I have a different rhythm from you. I have a lot of stupid pauses when I talk. Um, but there's a lot of things like that, and having an ear for that. So if I have Amanda talking to Odessa, it's going to be different from Beth talking to Cindy, because all 4 of those people have different ways of interacting. So that part of it is probably the fun part of editing. And it's always nice to learn new things, but I don't think that I'm particularly good at it. So it's one of those, and I don't think I'm bad at it. I don't think the show sounds bad. I'm definitely not implying that. I think it sounds really good. But I see what other sound designers, what experienced sound designers are able to do in the independent audio drama scene, and I can't I can't do that. Uh, the way that I go about things is very utilitarian, and it gets done, but it's not elegant in the way that a lot of these other shows are, and that would be a nice thing to have.
Mhm. No, and I heard it sounds like I don't know, it sounds great, for it being I wouldn't say, yeah, like you said, necessarily a one-man show, you do have, like, a little bit of a team, but as far as you, putting the labor of love into it, I'm sure you're you wish you could, like I don't know, it's mostly a labor of love coming from you,
Mhm.
from what it
Yeah,
sounds
and
like.
and that's part of it too, because, like, this is my passion project and it's my vision. So I also feel a little bit weird about asking people to put themselves out there and invest that much of themselves in something that is my passion and not theirs. And that's why Vitriol doing coming on in the way that she has, that that works. Her doing that works because she's a part of this. And I told her, I was talking to her about it the other day. I said, you're so much a part of the show's DNA, like every bit as much as I am. And that shows through in the product. And as her involvement got bigger and bigger, I think you can see that evolution in the tone of the show, in the way that emotions are conveyed in the show. So she's an extremely important part of what makes the show what it is.
And, I know, from what I think I saw on your site, Bethesda's pretty friendly with, fan made,
Mhm.
items. Have they ever reached out to you or given you some sort of, like, "Hey, props to, what you're doing as far as the audio drama?"
Yeah, they have actually, and it was nice because Bethesda is pretty famously, they're not big on promoting or acknowledging audio dramas. The only one that they had promoted directly was Chad, which is the first Fallout audio drama podcast. It's amazing. If you haven't listened to it, you should. Kenny is, in addition to being an incredible creator, he's an amazing guy. Like, he does an insane amount of charity work. You guys got a motor like no human being I've ever met. But he's pretty closely involved with Bethesda on a lot of this stuff. Like, he gets Bethesda people in the show.
Hmm,
And he told me basically what happened was he made the show, he put it out there, and some of the developers started listening to it, and it just sort of rolled from there. So I asked him early on. I said, "Okay, so what do I need to do? Who can I reach out to try to get Bethesda to recognize what we're doing here?" And he said, "You can't. Like, there's really no way to do it. Do what you're doing. They will reach out to you if they want to. There's no way to goose it." And I was shocked when they did. So yeah, so they've directly promoted us on social media. They, during the 25th anniversary run up, they gave us several things to do giveaways for. So
hmm,
they gave us a bunch of the Fallout 25th anniversary lithographs. They gave me, I think, $200 Bethesda Gear Store gift cards to give away, and all of those giveaways were leveraged to promote the show because they said, "Hey, you can work these giveaways and get more social media followers, get the word out," and then they directly promoted the show too. Which, so our show and Chad are the only two shows that Bethesda has formally acknowledged in that way. And they've also sent me personally some really cool stuff. I've posted about it on social media, but they send care packages of Fallout merch. Like, the one thing they sent and it was, I guess it was around November of last year. They sent a leather travel bag, a Fallout 76 leather travel bag that is just amazing. Like, it is just super quality. And there was like a responders blanket in there, and there was a little pack of breath mints and a Mentats tin, stuff like that. A journal which I sent to Vitriol because she loves journals. But yeah, they sent a few packages like that, and that's the kind of thing that really makes you feel good. It's nice to get stuff,
definitely.
but the recognition and the fact that Bethesda is tacitly saying, "Hey, we like what you're doing, so keep doing it." That means a lot.
Yeah, definitely. No, I would love yeah, and not only do they acknowledge it, but they, support it in that manner,
Mhm.
not any sort of, cease and desist or
Right.
anything
Yeah.
like that where it would just want you to stop what you're doing,
Mhm. Well,
So that's
and that's one thing about Bethesda. They are great about allowing fan creations of all kinds of different stripes. So they don't, they're happy you do a Fallout discussion podcast, you do a Fallout audio drama, you do fan art. whatever, they're cool with it. They wouldn't be cool with it if you make it a commercial endeavor. Like, if ABC decided to start doing a Fallout audio drama, they would sue them. But
Oh yeah.
just individual people, they're cool with it. And I mean, I'm surprised sometimes at what I see people get away with, that they saw. I mean, straight up Bethesda trademarks that are sold in merch stores, and I'm like, okay, I'm glad you got that hustle. Like, I'm not telling on anybody, because you got to get that cheddar, and I'm happy for anybody that goes out there and gets it. But yeah, they wouldn't they wouldn't say anything. I guess, and I don't know the answer to this, but maybe if it was offensive in a way that reflected poorly on Fallout and reflected poorly on Bethesda, maybe they would do something. Like if it was racist, or if it was
Yeah.
homophobic or something. If it was problematic in that way, I wonder if they would. But I don't know necessarily that they would. I think it's probably more likely that they would just ignore it and just say, okay, that's going to exist in whatever corner of the internet people that like that kind of thing hang out in, and we're just going to
Mhm.
pretend it doesn't exist, unless it becomes, you know, some kind of a giant problem.
Yeah, and it sounds like you treated the property, with respect, and it shows, and with the writing and all that. And as far as your writing goes, I know you say you've done writing before. As far as this story, or where does your like inspiration come from? As far as like writing for this story, do you have any sort of I don't know, a book that like an old story, old book, or from play you play the game yourself?
Hmm. Yeah, I've
I'm sorry, does the game like immediately inspire you, like just playing through the world to
well,
write?
kind of. So I'll tell you where the original first nugget of the idea for the story came from. When the first DL or the second DLC, which was the first Brotherhood of Steel DLC, dropped, Odessa Valdez, a character in our show, was a prominent character in that DLC. Odessa was a character that the Fallout fan community really latched onto, and we're like, this is a really great character, and it turned into a running joke on Reddit that you you couldn't romance her. As you know, in Fallout games, oftentimes you can romance characters and enter into romantic entanglements with them, but you couldn't do that with Odessa. And I don't know that you can necessarily do that with anybody in 76. But anyway, you couldn't do it with her, and people were like, oh, I sure wish I could do that. And I was like, well, what if you could? And that's where it started from. So it turned into a romance involving that character. So really, I mean, the foundational relationship of the show did come from the game. But
Mhm,
more generally speaking, when I write, what I think about are things that have moved me in the past. And I try to think of, okay, why did this scene from a movie or scene from a TV show move me? Why did it make me feel that way? So I dive into that and then try to replicate that feeling in my own story. Uh, and a lot of it comes down to tropes. Tropes are not necessarily bad. I think tropes get a bad rap sometimes, but I think that they are often a necessary part of storytelling. Like so many things, though, it comes down to execution. I think a good example of that is in the ninth episode of the first season. One of the things that I really wanted to do, because it's one of my favorite tropes, is the rousing speech, where you get a a leader or someone who stands up in front of the group and gives that speech that makes everybody run out and charge. There was one in Animal House where Bluto gives the speech to the guys, which has that classic line, uh, "Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor?" And it's like, should we tell him? No, no, no. He's rolling. Don't say anything. Um, and also another good one, which is what I'd be surprised if it wasn't an ad lib by Belushi, because it was hilarious and the timing was perfect. Because he said, "And when the going gets tough," and he just delayed because he couldn't remember the rest of the saying, and the music vamped, and and then he found, and the tough get going, and then so you have rousing speeches like that. The classic one, and the one that I based mine off of, is the St. Crispin's Day speech from Henry V, because that's sort of the standard the standard bearer for that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And just the way that made me feel, I'm like, okay, I want to write something in that vein that makes people feel the way that that speech made me feel. And it's like that for a lot of different things.
No, and do you? I know this is kind of ironic, or would you say, considering you said you played a AI character in the other drama, right? As far as a speaking voice, do you think AI nowadays is something you would use to help you write, or to as a crutch to lean on, or do you think it's gonna not necessarily you, but as far as all like writing nowadays impact in that way? You know.
Well, I think that AI has the potential to have some creative uses in terms of writing. Like one use case that I've seen is people using it for names, because I can tell you I'm bad at names. So things like that. I think more utility kind of things. But an AI is never going to be, I mean, never say never, I guess, but I don't think it will ever be creative in a way that a writer like Kenny or like Lawrence or like me can be, because all it's really doing is taking what's already been made, parsing it, and sort of rejiggering it and putting it out there, which is, despite the fact that we all work from inspirations and we we draw from our own experiences. It's in a very broad sense, it's similar, but it's not. The proof is in the pudding, and an artificial intelligence right now can't put things together in a way that will resonate with human beings. It's, for, I guess, for BuzzFeed or for press release copy, the kinds of things that are practically built from a template, then maybe an area like that. But in terms of actual writing, and I've actually used Chat GPT because I wanted to see. I asked
Mhm.
it to write a few scenes with different prompts, and they are not great. Uh, I will say they're not the worst things I've ever read, but I've read some really terrible stuff. I mean, humans are capable of making awful scripts too, but it's just it sounded like it was written by a computer. And
Yeah.
maybe it'll get better. I mean, I'm sure it will. Technology always does, but I think that it's more likely to become something that studios use so they don't have to pay people than something that will create a good product. And that's why a big part of the WGA strike that's going on right now, one of the big uh, negotiation points is WGA says no AI. You cannot use AI at any stage of the writing process under the bargaining agreement. And the studios are like, well, no, we're not going to agree to that, because they want to avoid paying people. They don't care about the quality. All they want is to be able to put content out there. So a guy like David Zaslav is like, oh, I can use an AI to make 10 seasons of 90-day extreme bass fishing fiance or whatever show is coming this fall on Discovery, and he
Yeah.
doesn't care. But the people that appreciate good TV, and I think there are a lot more of those people out there than the studios want to admit. People that want really good, well written, well acted TV, film, audio entertainment. The studios, I think, are just basically trying to get away with as much as they can in terms of not having people create this kind of content. And I hope that is one of the parts of the WGA strike that that we're successful with, because that's, I think, moving forward, one of the most important aspects of that agreement, on along with streaming residuals, which are a big problem right now.
Yeah, I've noticed, like, with AI, and like you said, as far as writing scenes, and I've seen, it write a comedy, like a comedy special, and it seems like it doesn't know when to stop for the human to feel that emotion. It just keeps going. So
Mm-hmm.
it feels like it omits emotion as far as like funny or sad
Mm-hmm.
or anger. It doesn't take that into consideration. It knows how to write a joke, but it doesn't know why you're laughing.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't know when you're supposed to laugh. So
Yeah, that's a
Like,
good way to put it. It understands the mechanics of some of this stuff, but it doesn't understand the why behind it.
mhm. Yeah, and like you said, it's just, almost regurgitated, from all the past thing, which I mean, that's kinda how the real life writing is almost, where, of course, we're taking from Shakespeare or from the old Greek stories and just kinda making our own thing, but, it's doing it in a way where, like, it's very calculated and with no emotion, you know?
Mhm. Yeah,
It's
and that's one thing that I learned early on because when I first started writing, I would work on something and then I'd stumble upon something that was very similar. I'm like, "Oh my god, like can I not come up with an original idea?" And then I realized there aren't that many original ideas left,
no.
like at the most basic level. So it really comes down to how you tell your own story, even though something very like it may have been told in the past. And Shakespeare is a good example of that because you have Taming of the Shrew, right? Taming of the Shrew was remade as 10 Things I Hate About You. So people even at that level where you're taking literally the same story, like you're consciously taking the same story and adapting it into a more modern kind of environment, even then you can do some really great stuff. So it's
Mhm.
it's it's one of those things that I don't get hung up on. And I mean, I'm not in a position where I'm going to be like Ed Sheeran and somebody's going to sue me because my because my story sounds vaguely like something else. And that's another interesting thing when you deal with studios. And I cringe when I see this. It's actually kind of similar to the Ed Sheeran thing. Because of that reason, sometimes if people have their pitches or their ideas not picked up by a studio and then they see a very similar story come out, like, oh my god, they stole my story. Well, it is extremely unlikely. I'm not saying it doesn't happen because sure, of course it does,
Mhm.
but it is extremely unlikely that in your individual situation that's what happened just because of that thing. And it's the same thing with Ed Sheeran. Can you trademark or copyright a chord progression? Well, the court says no, and I would tend to agree. Uh, so yeah, it's there's a lot of murky ground with some of this stuff, and it's interesting. It really comes down to you just kind of close your eyes, let go, and write your story, and let the rest of it come out in the wash. Just make the best story that you can. Don't worry about potentially realizing down the road, oh my gosh, this sounds derivative. It wasn't derivative when you wrote it. So, the fact that you found out later that there was something that reminds you of it, well, that's okay. That's going to happen.
And I think you're in a better position with that because this is like a labor of love. I feel like if you were making it, you had deadlines, or I'm sure you give yourself deadlines, but for a company, of course you're gonna not care if it's derivative or not. It's just like, oh, I'm getting paid the same whether it's good quality or not. Oh well. Uh,
Well, it does reduce the chances of getting a subsequent jobs if what you create isn't good. So there is
yeah.
there are some considerations there where you still want to put the best product, but it is definitely a different kind of a thing when you're doing something like this versus when you're doing something for hire.
Hmm.
So and you get kind of something in the middle a little bit where you have a showrunner that pitches an idea and then sees that idea through on a show. So for them it is uh, it is a passion project, but it's a passion project that a studio believed in, and they're backing that vision. So yeah, so there's different degrees of that kind of thing, but there's also like Kevin Smith is a guy, the guy who did Clerks and has done
Hmm.
several other really really awesome movies. One of the things that he does, he's talked about this, is he'll do script punch ups and script rewrites. He's like, if I need a little bit of money, I'll call the studio and they'll send over a script, and he just kind of goes through and fixes dialogue and fixes jokes and changes action beats and just makes it a little bit better. And that's more of a that's something that he doesn't have any personal emotional investment in. It's just he's a really good writer and he knows what he's good at, so he's able to go into these scripts and maybe make the things better that he's capable of making better, even though he doesn't have that same passion about it necessarily. In that case, it's more of a mechanical kind of a thing, but that's very common in Hollywood for folks to do punch ups like that.
Yeah. No, definitely. And I was saying here, I know, you're writing for, or, it's from Fallout. Were there any other games you you'd want to, I don't know, necessarily write for or consider like branching out to a different type of video game to explore that world,
Well,
as far as the drama?
I am taking part in an anthology series that's going to come out in. It's going to start in September. I forget which episode I'm signed up for. It's either episode 5 or episode 8 for Starfield, which is Bethesda's next big game. And that's a project that Kenny, who I mentioned, who does the Chad podcast, he's in charge of that. So he's doing, I think he said 4 episodes himself, and the rest of the episodes, I think then there's 8 total episodes in the middle that other writers are doing. Each of the other writers is doing one episode. I think each of us are only doing one episode, but that's a video game property that I'll be writing a single standalone episode for, because Kenny's amazing, and just to be involved with anything that he's doing is an honor, because he's a great guy. Like I said, he's not just immensely creative. He's just a really good person. He's helped me a lot. Like, one of the things that I was concerned about going in was, okay, I'm writing a story that centers on a romance that's a same-sex romance. And I asked Kenny, is I wanted to make sure I had standing to tell that story. And we talked about it. And, his opinion was absolutely, there is no problem about it. But then he pulled it, and he has a lot of reach. So, it was funny because he said, when I poll this, I think it's going to come down to about 80-20. He said, I think about 80% of people are going to be fine with it. 20% of people are going to say, no, you shouldn't do it. So he put the poll out and had a ton of votes, and it ended up being 85-15. So 85% of people said it was okay, and 15 said it wasn't. So little things like that, where I can get his perspective in a number of different ways, as a creator, as a human being, as somebody who's been through all this before. It's nice to have that kind of that kind of a resource. But in a broader sense, I didn't necessarily go in wanting to do a story based on an existing IP.
Hmm.
I'll say that I would generally prefer to tell stories built in a world of my own creation. And I think one of the differences between season 1 and season 2 is, while they both still take place in the Fallout universe, season 2 was a little bit more untethered from Fallout lore and the sort of the overall environment. It still clearly took place in Fallout 76's version of West Virginia, but the story diverged from that central narrative in a way that I don't think really any other Fallout audio dramas do. So I kind of, I guess I'm hedging my bets a little bit, or trying to have my cake and eat it too, where I'm very much telling my own stories, and in a lot of ways these stories at first blush don't necessarily have to be in the Fallout universe, but they're set in the Fallout universe. So I if I move on and do other things, whenever I stop doing this show, if it's now, if it's after a third season, whatever, if I do another project, I think it will not be based on an existing IP.
Okay. No, I remember. Do you know of the game? I think it was a tabletop RPG, Shadowrun.
Oh yeah, yeah. My friends
Yeah,
actually back in Pennsylvania played that a lot.
yeah. I remember. I don't know if you remember. They released a Shadowrun first person shooter game for the Microsoft the 360,
Mm,
and everyone hated it back then because it did a lot of things that, well, for one, Shadowrun's more of a tabletop RPG, so to make it into a first person shooter was blasphemy.
mhm.
But then also it was one of the first games to have cross platform where you could play against Windows users. And then it was everyone shits on it now, the one of the first games where it was only multiplayer, and
Oh,
for $60, it only had 5 maps, and everyone's like, "Oh, this isn't enough content." But you look at the world now of video games; that's all you get is multiplayer
mhm.
for $60, $70. So it was ahead of its time,
Yeah.
negative, positive, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, I remember writing. Like, I got into that world, and so I that's why I like wanted to reach out to you and like speak to you about it, because I remember like, oh, this is a great world. I remember writing, like, I'd say fan fiction for it, because it was me writing it from that universe. And no, I appreciate all your insight today as far as like the conversations and sort of that inspiration too, because the idea too of an audio drama nowadays, it's quite an undertaking. Like of course, there's other ways to do it, distribute stuff like that, but with people just turning out these like reality based things like podcasts where you just talk, about whatever, or real life news and drama. It's refreshing to like go back to almost these old, like I said, Lone Ranger,
Mhm.
War of the Worlds type
Mhm.
audio drama. And yeah, I appreciate and praise it, like
Yeah.
your you going along with that, and actually like like you said, it's your passion at the moment as far
Mhm.
as doing it. So
Yeah, and I think, the radio play thing, that really is, in terms of the way I wanted it to sound, that was very much my inspiration. Those, like, I have MP3s of old radio shows, and taking that idea and putting it into a more modern execution, so it doesn't sound like it was made in the 40s, in terms, you don't have everyone talking like this, that kind
mhm.
of thing. Like, it sounds like it's a modern thing, but the way that the story is structured, and the fact that there's no narration, all those kinds of things, that I wanted to evoke those old time radio dramas. And so here's a funny story that will show you that I'm an idiot sometimes. When I first got into the general podcasting scene, when I branched out a little bit from the Fallout community and started learning about other podcasts, they talked about actual plays. And I thought, okay, that's very similar to what I'm doing, right? An actual play is, you have everybody mic'd up and you're doing a stage production, right? Like, you're listening to an actual play, and then somebody's like, Brad, it's people playing a tabletop game. It's a TTRPG podcast. I'm like, oh, sorry, I'm an idiot. But I thought, boy, that's a great term. Yeah, an actual play, because it's really, the stage of your mind, and it's just like a stage. And they're like, no, Brad, it's not that at all.
No, I applaud it. Like it's and I've heard some audio dramas, and you have the audio books, but I don't know, to just do it, like I said, out of your own sort of wanting to do it, your passion. It's something that like I commend. It's as a writer, and with people like that churning out these podcasts that are just the same thing over and over again, or reality TV that's basically not made on the cheap for nothing. It's a breath of fresh air to have original writing and
Mhm.
original stories. You know what I mean? Even if they are based on IPs, they're still original because they're in this world that people already know exists, and it's,
Mhm.
I don't know, they're good to build upon. It's
Mhm.
just what is it? Just a base, and
Yeah,
you add on to it. So
it
no,
gets the world building out of the way. So, you
yeah,
don't have to make your own universe. You have one to build from. So that makes the barrier of entry a lot lower, because it makes that part of it a lot easier.
yeah, no, definitely. And uh, so I know I think I heard from your live stream yesterday. You said you were taking a break
Mhm.
from season after season 2 ended,
Mhm.
and you do plan to come back for the season 3, or is that still up in the air?
Yeah, I don't know. That's one thing, I'm not making any decisions
Hmm.
until, at the earliest, June, but I would think more likely probably sometime into July. I compared it on the live stream to LeBron James. Not that I'm the LeBron James of audio dramas or anything, but,
Hmm.
like, he's always said over the past year, he's like, I'm going to stick around long enough. I want to play with my son when he comes into the NBA, and that's going to be not next season, but the season after. And yet, after this most recent playoff series against the Nuggets, he was like, I really got to think about my future. I don't know if I'm going to be able to come back, because he put himself through an enormous physical toll, an enormous emotional toll. He just lost a playoff series when they were really playing well, were playing way above their heads in terms of where they were playing for the season. And, I think he, in his heart of hearts, felt, hey, listen, we have a shot at winning another championship here. So that didn't happen. So he has all that going on. So he isn't going to have, he's not in the right headspace to genuinely make that decision. So I'm sure he's gonna do what he said. He's gonna take some time. He's gonna think about it. But that's the way that I look at it too. Everything that goes on, you're so many emotional highs and so many emotional lows when you're right at the completion point, right when you've done it. So being able to step back, not think about it for a while, then come back and make that decision, it 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 means that you're going to be able to make the best decision based on the best available evidence. And I mean, it certainly wouldn't, if I don't come back, it's not going to be because of a lack of success. I mean, our momentum in terms of listenership and everything else just keeps going up. Like it's going up almost exponentially at this point. So, the other thing is, the last time I played fantasy sports was 2003. The reason for that is I won every league I was in. I even the XFL league I won. And I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm going out on top. I'm never playing it again. And I haven't. I've stuck to it. It's been 20 years now, and I have not played a single fantasy sports league because I believe in going out on top. So I'm definitely not going to overstay my welcome. So
Mhm.
that goes into it too. I think that I certainly have another good season in me. Like I'm not worried about that. I don't know what would be in that season. I have no idea because I, I I used every idea that I had in season one, and then I had to come up with a whole bunch of new ideas for season two. So I'm out of ideas again. So I'll have to come up with something new, but I'm confident that I'd be able to do that. And
Yeah.
we have the support of the community. We have a lot of great listeners. The cast is amazing. All everything that could be positive is positive, and it's there. So it's all going to come down to, do I want to put myself through this again? Um, I it's that's the hard part.
No, definitely. And well, I mean, as far as it being great, it is great. I hope you do choose to come back, but I completely understand from your explanation, just going out on that high note. I completely understand that. Well, I want to thank you for, your time today.
Yeah,
I really appreciate you coming and like speaking with me. This is
yeah,
great.
yeah. Appreciate you having me on. It was a really nice chat. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it was an inspiration. I really appreciate it. And yeah, tell people if you want to tell people where they could find all the information for Once Upon a Wasteland.
Yeah, so the show's website is onceuponawasteland.com, so it's easy to find there. There is some show art, there's links to each of the episodes, there's scripts for all of the episodes on each episode page. So there's a lot of good information there. We're available on every podcast player that's out there, at least everyone that I'm aware of, because I do check.
Hmm.
So all you have to do is search for Once Upon a Wasteland, and you'll find it there. On the show's Twitter account is Once Upon 76 Pod. My personal Twitter account, which I don't post on as much, is Reticent Duet, and Vitriol's Twitter account is Plays Vitriol. So those are the three Twitter accounts that are associated with the show. Now I'm also on Blue Sky. My handle there it's onceupon.bsky.social for the show account, and then it's reticentduet.bsky.social for my personal account. Vit is not there yet. I told her as soon as I got on, I was like, "Don't worry." I'm like, "My first invite will go to you," but I don't have but I don't have my invites yet because I've only been there for 3 or 4 days.
Uh-huh.
But I am there. We're on Instagram. Vit has a TikTok account, but most of the stuff that we do right now is on Twitter.
Okay, yeah, no, definitely put that in the show notes to get people going over there. And again, yeah, thank you for your time, Brad. I appreciate all the inspiring, information and just having a chat. It was great.
Yeah, and if I can say one other thing, you mentioned the inspiration thing. If anybody who's listening is considering doing something like this, do it. Like, just start it. Take that first step. Come up with a story. Maybe write some scripts. Just come up with a concept, whatever, and tell your story. That's what I did. I'm so glad that Lawrence was there to inspire me to do it and to help me along. So if anybody is listening and wants to and feels they have a story to tell, and I think just about everybody has a story to tell, if you
Hmm.
want to tell it, do it. So that's the closest thing I'll have to words of wisdom.
Yeah, I feel like, there's more regret in not trying
Mhm.
than to try, so
Yeah, you
not
miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
I completely agree, and again, thank you for your time, I hope to, see a season 3 and, appreciate, uh, your creative, writing. Keep
Well,
doing what you're doing.
thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Alright, and, yeah, I think that's it for today, thank you all for listening, take care, everybody.